Russian forces continue their advance on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, and other key cities. The onslaught has had an unexpected side effect. Vladimir Putin's war seems to be uniting an often divided world. In New York, the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly condemned the brutal onslaught. A slew of companies have closed down operations in Russia or divested themselves of Russian-related holdings. With harsh sanctions in place, Joe Biden says Putin's more isolated than ever. On To the Point, we're asking, Pariah Putin, isolated and angry? Welcome to the Point. It's a pleasure to greet our guests. Jessica Berlin is a German-American expert on geopolitics, founder and managing director of the consultancy Construct. Christoph von Marschall is diplomatic correspondent for Berlin's leading daily, Der Tagesspiegel. And it's a pleasure to welcome our colleague from DW's Russian desk, Roman Goncharenko, originally from Ukraine. He joins us now via Skype from the border between Ukraine and Romania. And Roman, as I understand it, you are there to try to help your family leave Ukraine. So tell us what you and they are experiencing at the moment.
Well, yes, here I am sitting in a hotel at the Romanian-Ukrainian border waiting for my family to come over. I have a lot of relatives in Ukraine and I urged all of them to come to Germany, but only my mother and my brother's family actually ventured to leave the city. They were all afraid. Most of them are elderly people and also families with children were very hesitant because they said it's dangerous to be on the road, and which is true. It's a very long distance, some 5 to 7, maybe 800 kilometers they have to drive, and it takes days to come. So my family spent 3 days to come here. Yesterday it was Thursday, and they were just driving for 15 hours. You can imagine, with kids, and my mother is not in a condition where she can manage long distances. But still, she's coming, and I do hope that she will be able to come to Romania, and then I'll bring her to Germany. But the rest of my family is staying there. Some of them in Kiev. I had a very emotional talk with my aunt. She's living outside Kiev, and her family was torn apart. Some part of her, they were planning to leave on 2 cars, and one car managed to get away, and her car with her daughter and some other kids was encircled. So they are staying in their home, sleeping in the basement, and are very terrified.
How long do you think that the Ukrainian forces defending Kiev, other cities as well, but particularly the capital, can hold out?
Well, I don't know. I think that they could hold out for weeks, maybe months, because the spirit is very, very strong. But we don't know how Russia would react. And I think Russia would probably try to use both during the siege. I mean, heavy bombardments, and trying to cut off electricity, food supplies, things like that. Mm-hmm. So it does look terrible for Kiev for the coming weeks, I think.
And just one other question. What awaits your family at the border? What are conditions there like? I've just heard from one of my own relatives who left Ukraine via the Polish border that there was a terrible press of people, almost a kind of a mob atmosphere, people desperately trying to get across.
Well, Poland is the main route which Ukrainians are taking, so that's why we decided to take the southern route over Romania or Moldova. We don't know yet exactly how they will come. But here is the situation more or less under control, I would say, especially on the Romanian border where I am. So I've heard a lot of positive reports that Romanian police and other services are very, very helpful.
Thank you so much. We'll be right back to you with some more questions in just a moment. But let me go now to Christoph. And Christoph, one manifestation of this surprising unity that I referred to earlier is the amazing reception that has been given to the refugees who are streaming out of Ukraine, already 1 million displaced people, including by countries that had shut their borders in 2015. And I'm thinking especially, as we saw, of course, Syrian and Afghanistan refugees entering Europe. And I'm thinking in particular of Hungary, Viktor Orban's Hungary, Orban known to have friendly relations with Putin. Do you think that in the wake of what we're seeing in Ukraine, Mr. Orban may be reconsidering his attempt to maintain those friendly relations and perhaps looking at more solidly joining the rest of the EU members? Or is this a temporary unity?
I think it's somewhere in between. I think there's a misunderstanding what the position of countries like Hungary and Poland was in 2015. And since we misunderstood what they meant then, we now try to understand it in the terms of that time. Poland and Hungary were never as xenophobic as they were portrayed in Western Europe, especially in Germany. It is also, if you look to refugee law, it is a difference whether people are coming over thousands of kilometers, going through a lot of countries where they would be secure, but decide to go on further for economic reasons. And that is a good reason. I don't say they shouldn't do that, but it's a difference whether there are coming people from your neighboring country where is war and you are the first place where they can be secure. Then you welcome them in a different way in comparison when you have the feeling, well, they could have been secure somewhere else, but they're nevertheless coming. That was the misunderstanding in 2015 in Germany. I don't want to defend people like Kaczynski or Orban, but we shouldn't exaggerate. Being the Polish leader, of course. We shouldn't exaggerate.
Just a brief word on Orban. Do you think we will see a new, solid EU unity with him? He, as you know, of course, has been backsliding on rule of law.
No, not solid. It will be, I think everybody has now a little bit getting in that we need solidarity. And if you divide the West or you divide the European Union, it will be to your disadvantage. Before the war, there was this feeling, I can get my personal advantage even if I am not solidary with the rest of the Union. And I think this has passed.
Let me go to Jessica. And in her address to this special meeting of the United Nations General Assembly this week, Jessica, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said the following, and I quote, "Russia's war marks the dawn of a new era. It's a watershed moment. It requires each and every one of us to take a firm and responsible decision and take a side." Are we seeing an Iron Curtain, a new Iron Curtain go down across Europe? Take a side?
Well, this is truly a turning point in German and in European history. What we've seen from this new government, the statements from Chancellor Scholz last weekend and from Minister Baerbock at the UN, this shows a complete shift in our entire foreign policy and security policy. What they're not doing is trying to divide Europe. On the contrary, this is a call for unity between democratic partners in Europe. What Russia has done, let me put it like this, no country in Europe has, no great power in NATO has tried more than Germany to maintain those close ties with Russia. In fact, Germany has been starkly criticized for months for not taking a harder line. So this is definitely not a call for a new Iron Curtain. On the contrary, Germany wanted to negotiate this phrase Dialogbereitschaft, the readiness for dialogue that Minister Baerbock was constantly stating in the past weeks, has come back to haunt her. And her statement at the UN showed that Germany has read the writing on the wall. They're serious about not just pursuing dialogue, but taking action.
If Putin is the anti-hero of the current crisis, Ukraine's president is his opposite number, delivering emotional appeals that are rallying support both at home and abroad.
Good morning to all of you Ukrainians. A lot of fake information appears now on the net, alleging I'm calling on our army to surrender and there are evacuations. I am here. We will not quit our resistance. We will defend our country, because our weapons are the truth. Our truth and the fact this is our land, our country, and our children. And we will defend all this. That's all. This is all I wanted to tell you. The capital, Kiev. The whole country is under fire from Russian forces. Amidst it all, a Ukrainian president who addresses his people, and the European Union, almost daily via video message. We are fighting for our rights, for our freedoms, for life, for our life. And now we are fighting for survival. And this is our main motivation. But we are fighting also to be equal members of Europe. A political novice and a well-known actor, Zielenski came to power 3 years ago. Today, in the middle of the war, the lawyer from a Jewish family has become a leading figure. Does he have what it takes to become an icon of freedom?
And let me put that question to Roman. Roman, would you have thought, let's say, months ago, that President Zielenski would wind up being this kind of figure, would wind up playing this kind of role? And I'm also curious what your family and others in Ukraine are saying about him.
Well, absolutely. It's a very interesting transformation. Zielenski was a controversial figure among Ukrainians who call themselves patriots. So the former president Petro Poroshenko was criticizing him harshly for not doing enough against the Russian aggression. And he was very controversial. And remember, just a few weeks ago, he was also criticized for trying to go after Poroshenko, to trying to put him on trial, things like that, and for not preparing enough for the Russian aggression. This is all forgotten now. He's a real hero now, and not only in Ukraine, but also abroad. I managed to meet him at the Munich Security Conference just a few days ago. And he made a very good impression. He made a very good speech, very strong. He's a former actor. He knows how to talk to the public. But he managed to find the right words. I think this is his number one strength, to find the right words at the right moment. And Ukrainians have rallied around him, his critics as well. And this is a very astonishing development.
And Roman, what do you think is likely to be President Zelensky's fate?
Well, I hope he survives. He will probably have to leave Kiev sometime later, I don't know, but it looks very much like that. But for the moment, he has chosen to stay, just like millions of Ukrainians as well, and just like the mayor of Kiev, the former box world champion Vitaly Klitschko, which is also an example of astonishing courage. Both Klitschko and Zielenski are now heroes here in Ukraine. They were before, but that admiration for them has grown much, much stronger. And this is a very good example for all Ukrainians who stay and who fight.
Christoph, not least in response to those very emotional appeals from President Zielenski, Western countries are now outdoing themselves with offers of weapons and military support to Ukraine. We're also seeing a number of EU countries calling for fast-tracked EU membership for Ukraine. Do you think all of that is likely to deter Putin or provoke him?
First of all, the unity is not as big as it seems from the outside. First of all, Germany was not ready to deliver weapons for defense.
But now it is,
first.
as we heard from Jessica.
Okay. Yes, now they are doing something.
And that's very surprising.
Zelensky is asking for more, and certainly we are not sending tanks. NATO could close the airspace over Ukraine, but we all know that they won't do that, although it would make a huge difference. But then, of course, there's a risk that would mean World War III if NATO would get engaged with Russian forces. So, yeah, and if you look at this fast-track membership, already very important countries spoke out against it. Germany, France, the Netherlands. So if people asking too much, then it rather splits the West or the EU as long as you are on a certain level, which might not be enough, but everybody can agree on, it looks like unity. But if you go further, then the unity is not so reliable anymore. So I'm a little bit cautious about. And you asked about Putin. Will he be convinced? I think Putin lives in his own world. And what news gets to him and to his head, we don't know about that. He is surrounded now by almost 20 years by yes-sayers and people who are not challenging him. So I don't say that he is crazy. I would never use those words. I think he is rational, but he is rational in his own world. And the world in which Vladimir Putin is rational might not be the real world. And that makes it dangerous. So if he gets all these signals of unity of the West, or whether he still thinks, the West is decadent, in the end they won't do anything which really hurts them, that we don't know. The test is out.
Jessica, I want to get your comment also on the offers of weapons support. And I wonder how surprised you were to hear even EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, for the first time, offering weapons and military support to the tune of 500 million euros, not a paltry amount. Is that helpful, or does it risk actually importing the conflict into the EU?
This conflict is already a European conflict, let's be clear. And the threat of World War III, the threat of nuclear war that we face it with or without NATO action on setting up a no-fly zone. This is an incredibly volatile, dangerous situation. And the EU, first and foremost, made the right decision to support President Zielenski and answer his call for military aid. To not do so would have been to basically put the nail in the coffin of the Ukrainian resistance to this invasion. However, to your points around the threat of war with Russia directly, there are many people right now in Eastern Europe and in the Baltic states who are already saying, if we don't take more action now, this won't stop with Ukraine. All right? Vladimir Putin, in his own logic, in whatever reality he is currently occupying, he sees the former Soviet Union as something that needs to be reclaimed and re-put together. And this will not stop with Ukraine, just like it didn't stop with Georgia, it didn't stop with Crimea, all right? We need to start believing what he says.
And certainly, French President Emmanuel Macron had much the same to say after speaking with Vladimir Putin this week and hearing Putin tell him essentially that he plans to go all the way. Let me go back to Roman to find out whether you think the weapons deliveries to Ukraine are, in fact, getting there in time, and whether they will make a difference.
Well, they certainly will make a difference. They already are, because we see that Ukrainian armed forces are able to stop Russian military columns with the help of those Javelin anti-tank missiles or laws from UK. So they are very, very important. And Germany delivering them, of course, it comes too late. But, well, I wouldn't say it's a game changer, but it is a significant force that Russia didn't reckon with, I think, when they were planning this operation. So it was good that the West, first of all, United States and United Kingdom, delivered those weapons in the weeks prior to the assault. Let me make one more point about what you've just been discussing, about Putin's plans, which go beyond Ukraine. I totally agree with that. And there is one thing that I'm thinking these days, and everything we see in Ukraine happening now, this war, all-out war, that most of us were not thinking about, and were thinking, well, that is not possible. This is something that they have been discussing on Russian state TV for years, in very exact the same details that we are facing in reality now. Those discussions on talk shows on Russian TV were ignored in the West. We thought it was crazy, but it was not. So I think we have finally to take seriously what Russians are saying and what they are discussing, because they used the 8 years after the annexation of Crimea to prepare the public in Russia, to prepare the Russian people that such an aggression against Ukraine is possible, that it is possible to divide Ukraine, and it is possible to go nuclear after Western Europe, or Eastern Europe, sorry.
Yeah, Roman,
so
we are...
discussion Russian state TV about nuclear strikes against Poland or against the Baltic states. So we have to consider that.
Roman, we are hearing about increasing disillusion within Russia. We hear about protests. We hear about pushback, for example, from the board of the Lukoil oil company, surprisingly enough. Will any of that make a difference? Briefly, if you would.
I think yes. I'm hearing reports from Russia that makes me think Russia probably underestimated how quick the response from the West will be on the economic front and how heavy it will hit Russia, because there are already shortages of spare parts, shortages of medicine. And the Russians are really shocked that Western companies are leaving Russia. I think they didn't consider that.
Let me quickly come back to the topic of Western unity and solidarity and bring in an excerpt from President Biden's State of the Union speech this week. Many people feel that the Ukraine conflict has reset the button on transatlantic unity in a way that few would have believed possible just a year ago.
Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong. We are ready. We are united, and that's what we did. We stayed united. We prepared extensively and carefully. We spent months building coalitions of other freedom-loving nations in Europe and the Americas, from America to the Asian and African continents, to confront Putin. Like many of you, I spent countless hours unifying our European allies. We shared with the world in advance what we knew Putin was planning and precisely how we would try to falsify and justify his aggression.
Christoph, let me ask you about also here the durability of this transatlantic unity. Both Biden and the Secretary General of NATO have said, listen, Mr. Putin, if you think you're going to get less NATO by prosecuting this war against Ukraine, you're wrong. You're going to get more NATO. And we've heard a lot from NATO about how they are shoring up the defenses of the most vulnerable member states, for example, the Baltic republics. Realistically, how defensible are the Baltic republics? How strongly can NATO, in fact, act to help them?
Well, that is a weak point on our eastern flank. And we should be already now be very grateful to the Ukrainians for their resistance, because it buys us time to enforce NATO presence in the Baltic states. If you look at the map, there's a very small corridor which connects Poland to the Baltic states. It's just 60 kilometers wide. On the western side is Kaliningrad, where there's a lot of military Russian presence. On the other side, eastern side, is Belarus, which is also a state where you have Russian military on the ground. And if the Russians would be able to cut into that corridor and to cut it off, then it would be almost impossible to defend the Baltic states. And the Western, we will be tested. What we see now is not the real test. We will be tested in the next weeks, because if Putin decides to attack the Baltic states, the Western response or threat was always, you might occupy their territory. But NATO is 15 times the resources you have in Russia. Russia is 3% of the world economy. The West is over 40%. So we can come back with superior forces and take it away from you. And what is when Putin then says, okay, then I will send a nuclear-armed missile to Berlin or to Hamburg. What will the German society then do? Will we be ready to say, well, you can't enter a nuclear war right now. We don't believe you that you will do that. We will stand up anyway. And I'm not so sure how we will respond to these kinds of tests which are coming. we shouldn't be so sure that this is just Ukraine.
I'm sorry, we're almost out of time. I want to just get back to our title, if I may, and ask how isolated Putin truly is with the request for a short answer. He's got China on his side. There are a whole host of states who abstained on that General Assembly resolution supporting Ukraine. So how long can he hold out? How much support does he have, briefly?
The number one question is, how much support does he have in the Kremlin? He is incredibly isolated. We see the pictures of him at the table. He's literally sitting there alone. The question is, can the Russian security forces step in and help isolate him further and remove him from power?
Roman, what do you think about that? Is Putin feeling isolated, or is he isolated or empowered?
Well, he is definitely isolated from the free world. I think that's what.
Unfortunately, bad sound there, I'm afraid, Roman. Try one more time.
I think he is isolated, but this is what he wanted.
Thank you very much for that contribution and those last words for this show. And thank you to all of you for joining in. See you again soon.